They're not your husband. Earl Ober was between jobs as a salesman. But Doreen, his wife, had gone to work nights as a waitress at a 24-hour coffee shop at the edge of town. One night, when he was drinking, Earl decided to stop by the coffee shop and have something to eat. He wanted to see where Doreen worked, and he wanted to see if he could order something on the house. He sat at the counter and studied the menu. "What are you doing here?" Doreen said when she saw him sitting there. She handed over an order to the cook. "What are you going to order?" "Earl," she said. "The kids okay?" "They're fine," Earl said. "I'll have coffee and one of those number 2 sandwiches." Doreen wrote it down. "Any chance of, he said to her and winked. "No," she said. "Don't talk to me now. I'm busy." Earl drank his coffee and waited for the sandwich. 2 men in business suits, their ties undone, their collars open, sat down next to him and asked for coffee. As Doreen walked away with the coffee pot, one of the men said to the other, "Look at the ass on that." "I don't believe it." The other man laughed. "I've seen better," he said. "That's what I mean," the first man said. "But some jokers like their quim fat." "Not me," the other man said. "Not me neither," the first man said. "That's what I was saying." Doreen put the sandwich in front of Earl. Around the sandwich there were French fries, coleslaw, dill pickle. "Anything else?" she said. "A glass of milk?" He didn't say anything. He shook his head when she kept standing there. "I'll get you more coffee," she said. She came back with the pot and poured coffee for him and for the 2 men. Then she picked up a dish and turned to get some ice cream. She reached down into the container and with the dipper began to scoop up the ice cream. The white skirt yanked against her hips and crawled up her legs. What showed was girdle, and it was pink, thighs that were rumpled and gray and a little hairy, and veins that spread in a berserk display. The 2 men sitting beside Earl exchanged looks. One of them raised his eyebrows. The other man grinned and kept looking at Doreen over his cup as she spooned chocolate syrup over the ice cream. When she began shaking the can of whipped cream, Earl got up, leaving his food, and headed for the door. He heard her call his name, but he kept going. He checked on the children and then went to the other bedroom and took off his clothes. He pulled the covers up, closed his eyes, and allowed himself to think. The feeling started in his face and worked down into his stomach and legs. He opened his eyes and rolled his head back and forth on the pillow. Then he turned on his side and fell asleep. In the morning, after she had sent the children off to school, Doreen came into the bedroom and raised the shade. Earl was already awake. "Look at yourself in the mirror," he said. "What?" she said. "What are you talking about?" "Just look at yourself in the mirror," he said. "What am I supposed to see?" she said. But she looked in the mirror over the dresser and pushed the hair away from her shoulders. "Well," he said. "Well, what?" she said. "I hate to say anything," Earl said, "but I think you better give a diet some thought. I mean it. I'm serious. I think you could lose a few pounds. Don't get mad." "What are you saying?" she said. "Just what I said. I think you could lose a few pounds." "A few pounds, anyway," he said. "You never said anything before," she said. She raised her nightgown over her hips and turned to look at her stomach in the mirror. "I never felt it was a problem before," he said. He tried to pick his words. The nightgown still gathered around her waist. Doreen turned her back to the mirror and looked over her shoulder. She raised one buttock in her hand and let it drop. Earl closed his eyes. "Maybe I'm all wet," he said. "I guess I could afford to lose." "But it'd be hard," she said. "You're right, it won't be easy," he said. "But I'll help." "Maybe you're right," she said. She dropped her nightgown and looked at him, and then she took her nightgown off. They talked about diets. They talked about the protein diets, the vegetable-only diets, the grapefruit juice diets. But they decided they didn't have the money to buy the steaks the protein diet called for. And Doreen said she didn't care for all that many vegetables. And since she didn't like grapefruit juice that much, she didn't see how she could do that one either. "Okay, forget it," he said. "No, you're right," she said. "I'll do something." "What about exercises?" he said. "I'm getting all the exercise I need down there," she said. "Just quit eating," Earl said. "For a few days, anyway." "All right," she said. "I'll try. For a few days I'll give it a try. You've convinced me." "I'm a closer," Earl said. He figured up the balance in their checking account, then drove to the discount store and bought a bathroom scale. He looked the clerk over as she rang up the sale. At home he had Doreen take off all her clothes and get on the scale. He frowned when he saw the veins. He ran his finger the length of one that sprouted up her thigh. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. He looked at the scale and wrote the figure down on a piece of paper. "All right," Earl said. "All right." The next day he was gone for most of the afternoon on an interview. The employer, a heavy-set man who limped as he showed Earl around the plumbing fixtures in the warehouse, asked if Earl were free to travel. "You bet I'm free," Earl said. The man nodded. Earl smiled. He could hear the television before he opened the door to the house. The children did not look up as he walked through the living room. In the kitchen, Doreen, dressed for work, was eating scrambled eggs and bacon. "What are you doing?" Earl said. She continued to chew the food, cheeks puffed. But then she spit everything into a napkin. "I couldn't help myself," she said. "Slob," Earl said. "Go ahead, eat. Go on." He went to the bedroom, closed the door, and lay on the covers. He could still hear the television. He put his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling. She opened the door. "I'm going to try again," Doreen said. "Okay," he said. 2 mornings later she called him into the bathroom. "Look," she said. He read the scale. He opened a drawer and took out the paper and read the scale again while she grinned. "3/4 of a pound," she said. "It's something," he said and patted her hip. He read the classifieds. He went to the state employment office. Every 3 or 4 days he drove someplace for an interview, and at night he counted her lips. He smoothed out the dollar bills on the table and stacked the nickels, dimes, and quarters in piles of $1. Each morning he put her on the scale. In 2 weeks she had lost 3.5 pounds. "I pick," she said. "I starve myself all day, and then I pick at work. It adds up."